So you can't talk about U.S. history without talking about something that happened literally right there, right next door to where we are.
Yeah.
The Twin Towers. September 11, 2001, terrorist attack, 2 planes hit the towers. One of the worst terrorist attacks globally ever. What you probably don't know, however, is that 6 weeks before 9/11, a poor Jewish entrepreneur who built an empire ended up purchasing the Twin Towers.
Yeah.
He was not the highest bidder. He shouldn't have won the bid.
But he did.
He was able to figure out a way to do so. And that is really the story of our next guest, Larry Silverstein.
Yeah.
He is the most unlikely person to build a real estate empire. When you look back on Manhattan right behind us, this entire city, this landscape here was built by Larry Silverstein.
Larry Silverstein truly started from the bottom and now he's here. I mean, Larry was broke. And Larry Silverstein buys he reads about this incredible deal for the Empire State Building that is so creative. And he turns to his father and they have nothing. And he says, Dad, we need to buy real estate. And they find a way to buy a building with no money.
Don't share that yet.
No money.
You will hear his story of how he did that. But also, one thing that's so compelling is when you hear the way he's done business over the years, he's turned competitors into partners. He's turned rivals into collaborators.
And he's lived through some of the worst times in American history, the 1970s with 20% plus interest rates, the savings and loan crisis, 2001, 2008. And one of the lines Larry has that I love is that he's like, I came into this world with nothing. It's important that I make an impact and I make a difference. And the impact Larry has had, not just in business, in creating jobs, in creating landmark icons, in his philanthropic work, both in the medical center and beyond, is just, it's impacted so many lives.
He epitomizes what is called tikkun olam. Leave this world with more than you brought into it. And Larry is truly someone who started from the bottom and now he's here. Hey everyone. Big Shot is not just a passion project to us, where we archive Jewish entrepreneurial history.
It's a way to fight hate speech and anti-Semitism by telling memorable stories that allow people to connect and understand one another better.
We know stories can bring people together, and these are the stories that have never been told before. And this is a chance to see people like you've never seen them before.
Think about David Rubenstein, who started as the son of a postman but built a $400 billion business. Or Izzy Sharp, who started with one hotel more than 50 years ago and today has built one of the greatest hotel chains in the world in the Four Seasons.
Telling these stories and archiving Jewish entrepreneurial history is not just a job for two people.
We're looking for others who want to help preserve the lessons of Jewish icons.
We're looking for people who want to help us build this archive and can be part of the Big Shot family.
If you want to be an executive producer and you want to help fund Big Shot,
please fill out the form below on this video.
We're chasing a dream and we're looking for others who feel the same obligation as us.
Who feel the same passion and responsibility as we do to archive our history, to fight hate, and to bring people together.
Started from the bottom, now the whole team here. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now my whole team in. Started from the bottom, now we here. Started from the bottom, now the whole team here. I done kept it real from the jump.
I want to go back to the Silverstein dinner table when you were growing up, talking with your parents, and this is well before real estate. You know, there's this great line. We did a lot of research on you, Larry. One of the lines we love is, at one point you tell your father, "Dad, we should go into real estate." And your dad says, "How? We have no money." And you say, "Well, look what Harry did." And I think the guy's name, Harry Helmsley, bought the Empire State Building with 5,000 investors, each putting in $5,000 each. And you said, "Dad, look at what Harry did." Was that the topic of conversation around the dining room table, the Shabbos dinner table growing up? Was it business? What was it?
I was working with my father, trying to lease space, trying to sell buildings. And I realized that we were starving to death. We weren't making enough money to survive. Right? So I finally said to him, "Dad, I'm getting married. I want to have a family. I can't do it this way. We're not making any money. We got to become owners." He said, "But we have no money. How do we buy a building without any money? No resources, right?" I said, "Harry Helmsley just bought the Empire State Building, right? None of his money, everybody else's money." So he said, "Can you figure it out?" I said, "I don't know, but I'll try." So I got the pamphlets, analyzed it, figured out. I said, "Okay, I think I know what to do. Let's find a building to buy, and we'll see if we can get people to invest with us." And we did. And that's exactly what we did. Remember going out, finding a building to buy, and the seller wanted a contract deposit of $15,000. We didn't have $15,000, more money than we didn't have a car, didn't have anything. So we went to the banks. We started asking banks, we need to borrow $15,000. They said, what's your collateral? I said, if we had collateral, we wouldn't be here. And this bank after bank after bank, we couldn't find a bank to lend us a dime because we had nothing. My father and I had lunch one day in Radner's restaurant, a dairy restaurant on the Lower East Side. We're walking back from the restaurant, and there's a bank across the street. I think it was 85 and 95 on Delancey Street on the Lower East Side. I said, Dad, there's a bank we haven't tried yet. So I went across the street, went to the bank, and started talking to a guy named Phil Green. He managed the bank. He said, how can I help you? I said, we'd like to borrow $15,000 with which to sign a contract to buy a building. He said, okay. Do you have any collateral? I said, if we had collateral, we wouldn't be here. So he said, yeah, what's the deal? So I had some papers with me. I always carry them. I took out the papers and I said, we'd like to buy this building. And because I think it's a good opportunity, it's good upside. The building's in terrible condition, a lot of vacant space. It looks like hell. It really is down. And I think with some fixing up, it would do better. So he said, he listens, and he said, okay. Opens a drawer, takes out a piece of paper, puts it in front of me and says, sign it. I said, what is it? He said, it's a promissory note. I said, you're going to give us the money? He said, isn't that what you want? I was so shocked. Finally, a bank was ready to give us the money. He said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'll lend you the $15,000. You're going to use it to sign the contract. You're going to assign the contract to the bank. That's your collateral. I said, that's fantastic. So I remember doing exactly that. We signed the contract, brought the contract to the bank. I said, here's the collateral I promised you, so forth. Fine. He said, okay, what are you going to do for the rest of the money? He said, I don't know. I haven't thought.
I didn't think I'd get the money.
Right, because you'd been to, I mean, I'm sure tens, if not hundreds of banks at this point. They'd all said, buzz off.
Every one of them. It was amazing. Right. So I remember, I said, look, I showed him the article, Empire State Building. I said, I want to do it. Have you ever done this before? I said, no. Do you know what you're doing? I said, maybe, I hope so, but we're going to find out. I said, but failure is not an option, so we have to succeed. Okay. He said, I said, by the way, if you have any recommendations, don't hesitate. He said, okay, first thing you need to do, $600,000 is the price of the building. Get yourself a mortgage. I said, well, can you give us a mortgage? He said, no, we're not that kind of bank. You got to go to a savings bank for that. I said, okay, who? Which one? He said, well, the building's on 23rd Street. Go to a bank on 23rd Street, savings bank. So, okay, so we went to 23rd Street, looked for a savings bank, Broadway Savings Bank. Walked into the Broadway Savings Bank. Guy by the name of Norman Ramsey.
Wow, you know other names, you still remember them.
Yeah, I couldn't.
And this is what, 75 years ago?
This is
70 years ago?
Yeah. It was 1957.
Wow.
And all because you read an article that Harry Helmsley got 5,000 investors for $1,000 a piece.
Bought the Empire State Building.
To buy the Empire State Building. Yeah.
So you get the mortgage?
He gave us, he said, how much do you want? I said, how much can I get? So he said, first thing you need is, and if you got to get an appraisal. Okay. Who do I go to for an appraisal? He said, I would recommend Leon Spear. Who's Leon Spear? He's an appraiser. But he's also a guy by the name of Leon Spear. He's with Helmsley Spear. I said, okay. I'll be appraiser. Appraiser calls me back one day. He said, I'll give you the appraisal. He said, you got a $350,000 mortgage. The appraisal will qualify for you. Don't worry about it. He said, but I'd like to offer you a profit for your contract. I said, a profit? He said, yeah, we want to buy your contract. I said, for how much? He said, $100,000.
Which at the time must have felt like 100 million.
I said, 100,000? I said, let me call you back. Ran into my father. I said, Dad, we've just been offered a $100,000 profit.
You haven't done anything yet, right? Like,
I said, they're going to give us back the $15,000 we borrowed and $100,000 profit.
wow.
I said, Dad, we gotta sell this. He said, he looked at me and he said, you know, if I was by myself, I'd say, sell it, take the money. I said, but this could be something great for you, for your future.
Wow.
He said, let's stay with it.
Wow.
He said, find out who the purchaser was or is. Call the appraiser. And I said, who's the buyer? He tells me, the guy's he buys and sells contracts. So I said to my father, I said, Dad, this is a very prominent purchaser. We should sell it to him. He said, son, he said, this is a guy who buys and sells contracts for a profit. If he pays us $100,000 profit, he's going to resell it. So the building's obviously worth significantly more than what we paid for it, right? He said, let's keep it. I said, Dad, he said, let's keep it. Wow. Let's find the investors, right? So I said, okay, how do we find investors? So he said, I've spent the last 20 years of my life with people leasing space from, right? Leasing lofts, leasing stores and so forth. He said, let's go to them. So we started going to each of those people, and we found 25 people who each invested $10,000 with us to become a limited partner in the ownership of 212 24 East 23rd Street.
Wow.
And that was your first building?
That was your first
That was our first building.
You know, one of the things that we loved hearing about also was, as you sort of continued to build your empire, one of the things that is clear to me is that you had a particular way of doing business, a particular way of, if there was a building that you thought was important, that needed to be there. I mean, we'll talk about World Trade and that a little bit later, but what was your sort of philosophy as you got bigger and had more real estate? Was there a particular strategy that you used that made you so much more successful than others?
I think we grew. We bought, every time we bought a building, we found another group of investors. Sometimes the same people would give us money to do it. So we went from a $10,000 investor to a $25,000 investor to a $50,000 to a $100,000 investor. And after acquiring 5 or 6 buildings in this fashion, each one a little bigger than the last one. So now we're finally in the couple of $1 million category. We got a call from the banks that wouldn't lend us $15,000. And they said, we're watching what you're doing. And we just want to tell you, forget about the investors you're going to. We'll give you whatever you need.
Wow. And what were you doing? I mean, was it that you executed so well on taking buildings that were undermanaged, that had high vacancy, were
needed reconditioning, replenishment.
And you were able to do that cost effectively and yeah.
In the beginning, we didn't know what the hell we were doing. We had no experience, none.
Right.
So I remember at 212 24 East 23rd Street, we looked at the floors. They were filthy. Vacant floors. Mm-hmm. Hadn't been occupied for years. So I remember my father saying, let's get a spray painter to spray everything here white, right? So we got a spray painter, came in, sprayed everything white. You couldn't do that today.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Then we got a guy who ground floors, scraped
polishing.
floors, polisher, grinder, a scraper. Yeah. And he started scraping the floors. Filth. A couple of inches of filth. The floors were magnificent hardwood floors.
Wow, you didn't know.
They didn't have a clue. You couldn't know. They're filthy, right?
Right.
This hadn't been done in, I don't know, 30 years, 40 years. But the hardwood floors, we went down to the Army Navy surplus stores on Canal Street. We took a cab down. We bought some surplus fluorescent fixtures, put them in the cab, took the cab up to the building at 23rd Street, got the super, said to the superintendent, hang these lights, spread them around a little bit, right? So you could look at the floors. And he put up these fluorescent lights, the hardwood floors, the white paint. We cleaned the windows, and all of a sudden, we were able to rent the space that hadn't been rented in years.
Wow.
We could rent it. And we rented it for, instead of 50 cents a foot, we got $1 a foot. Wow. Which was phenomenal.
Incredible, incredible.
So we started paying these people 1% a month for their return.
Wow.
And within a couple of years,
Everyone wanted to invest with you.
it was
unbelievable.
phenomenal.
Larry, you brought in, I mean, we looked at all your deals in researching you, and one of the ones that really jumped out at me is in the 70s when you guys bought on Fifth Avenue, 711, I think it was 711 Fifth Ave, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things you did there, I mean, just to set the stage, New York is effectively bankrupt. The city could not be in worse shape. And you buy this iconic building, but you have several competing bids. And whereas most people's instincts would be eliminate the competition and try and beat the competition, you brought people in.
We brought the competitors. I brought the competitors
Right.
in.
Tell us about that. That's
yeah.
fascinating to us because almost nobody would have done that. They would have,
Right.
I mean, they would have either lost or potentially won with a risk. You sort of hedged your bet.
Yeah, why?
And made it impossible for you to lose.
Okay. By this time, I began to know a lot of people.
Okay.
And young people like myself. And I remember going to Cy Malheur, the treasurer of Columbia Pictures, and saying, I hear you want to sell your building. I said, I think I'd
And this is
like
the famous Columbia Pictures building.
Yeah, 711
Yeah.
Fifth Ave.
7-Eleven.
I said, I think I'd like to buy it. So we negotiated a price, and I think we bought it. I think it was $11.5 or $12.5 million, with a couple of $1 million in cash and a purchase money mortgage from Columbia Pictures. And we shook hands, and he said, oh, I'll prepare the contract, and we'll get together in a couple of days and sign it. So I said, fine. By this time, the banks were giving us whatever we needed, so I didn't have to go out and get investors, right? A couple of days go by, no contract. I called him, I said,
Cy, what's going on?
where's the contract? He said, we have another bidder. I said, you have another bidder? So I said, I said, let me think about that. The next day, I'm going to a real estate board of New York dinner. By this time, I've gotten involved.
Yeah.
You own several properties in this book. Yeah.
He's a big shot.
He's a big shot, yeah.
And as I'm going up the escalator, I look.
It's your competitor, the person who's also bidding.
I see someone who I know
Yeah.
coming down the escalator. I said, George. I said, wait, I want to talk to you. Got upstairs, got the escalator, came down, met him downstairs. I said, are you competing to buy 711 Fifth Avenue? He looked at me and said, how'd you know?
How did you know?
I remember talking to him. He knew a lot about the movie business. He knew a lot about motion pictures. And I said to myself, who else would have an interest in this?
Real estate guy, likes the motion picture business,
So
knows a
I
lot
just
about
put it together.
The Venn diagram overlaps on George.
How'd you know? I said, listen, let's make a deal. Instead of competing with you, let's buy it together. He said, Larry, that's fantastic. Let's do it.
Wow.
I said, you or I will drop. He said, okay, I'll drop out. You negotiate the contract.
I'll be your partner.
Right? We'll be partners. I said, great. Shook hands. That was it. Went back to Salomon. I said, how's the competition going? He says, no competition. Guy pulled out. Okay. I said, can we get going? He said, okay. Give me another day. 2 days go back, no call. I said, what happened? He said, believe it or not, there's another competitor. I said, you're kidding. He said, no. So I called George.
George is the one that you just recently brought in, who is in
The first competitor who's now the partner.
First competitor.
Yeah.
Right? I called George. George Kaufman.
George Kaufman, okay.
Yeah. And lovely guy, same age and so forth. So
Jewish real estate guy.
yeah. And so I said, George, there's somebody else out there. He said, well, let's think about who the possible players are. So we started talking about different people who it might be. I said, could this be Richard Bernstein? He's in the market doing the same kind of things we are. He said, do you know him? I said, yeah. I said, okay, I'm going to call him and see if we can. I called Richard. I said, you're competing for the 711 Fifth Avenue Columbia Pictures building? He said, yes. He said, I made a deal with Peter Feinberg to join me. I said, listen, I made a deal with George Kaufman. You made a deal with Peter Feinberg. Come on, let's put our heads together and buy the goddamn building.
So you have Feinberg, Silverstein, Kaufman, and
Feinberg.
and then they started a law firm afterwards. Yeah.
So 4 of you all go in together.
And the idea being that you're not going to bid it up this way. You're going to, right.
Because everybody suddenly disappeared.
Sure.
Right.
And I'm still there. Right?
Yeah.
Now I'm at fine. So, okay, I'll give you the deal.
Yeah.
And we made the deal. I didn't have to pay an extra dime.
Amazing.
Nothing.
The original deal was the original deal you got.
That's it.
Right. Cy must have been pretty pissed off.
He was.
Of course.
Sure.
He thought he had 3 different bidders or 4 bidders. Now he's got 1.
And I remember George Kaufman, after we signed the contract, it was ours, right? We got it. The location, 5th Avenue and 55th Street. Superb location. Superb. Good building. Had some upside. The rents were moderate. So we could raise rents. But the location was so fantastic. And the thing you learn early on in real estate, location. The key words, because that really makes
That's all that matters, yeah.
End of day. Remember George coming to me, he said, George Kaufman, he said, you know, Larry, he said, we ought to buy the stock.
Columbia stock?
Yeah, Columbia Pictures.
And Columbia is your tenant at this point.
Yeah, but they're in financial difficulty. That's why they had to sell the building. I really didn't know a thing about the stock market. And I said, George, do you know anything? He said, no, but Columbia Pictures, good, quality. And so
Columbia, it's a tier 1 organization, a brand. Yeah.
So I said, we're doing so well, doing what we're doing. Maybe it's smarter not to branch out into something I don't have a clue about. Just stay with real estate. And that's what we decided to do. Turns out, made a mistake. Should have bought the goddamn stock.
Because Coca-Cola ended up buying
So
Columbia.
Coca-Cola comes along.
Yeah.
They have nothing but syrup and cash.
I like that. Coca-Cola's got
Nothing
syrup
but
and
syrup.
cash. What else do you need?
They called. We want to buy it. He said, we own Columbia Pictures.
So Coca-Cola buys Columbia, and as part of that, they now want to buy back the famous Columbia building.
Yes. Right.
Okay.
So they made an offer. I listened to it and I said, not for sale. But the offer, was one hell of an offer.
Sure.
Multiple millions of dollars more than we paid for the building. Multiple millions. But I remember calling everybody and saying, Larry, it's a pretty goddamn good offer. I said, it's not goddamn, it's fantastic. I said, but I think there's more upside here. He said, well, see what you can do. So I'm negotiating now for everybody, right? And we were able to, no, finally led to a point where my partner said, listen, you know, you can't turn this down. It's just too good. I said, guys, we're leaving a lot of money on the table. If we sell it, yeah, we'll do fantastically well, no question about it. And you can never lose money by making a profit. I said, but it's a hell of a building, a hell of a location, and the upside is still tremendous. So I said, personally, I'd recommend, let's keep it, because there's a ton to go yet. So they said, come on, don't be stubborn. Let's sell. So we're all friends. I said, okay, if you guys want to, yes. Okay, so we sold it. We made a bloody fortune, absolute bloody fortune. And
I believe the numbers are you sold it for, you put in about $2 million of cash, sold it, bought it for around 14 or 12, and then sold it for 57. But then they sold it for 990 something. You know, a lot of people don't like partners. Why do you like partners so much? I mean, you've had so many in your life.
It was an easy way to make progress, to move along, right? So if you had competitors, unless you didn't like, if the competitors, if you couldn't live with them, something. But if they're good people, people you know, people you grew up with, people started with nothing, like myself, right? We all started with absolutely nothing. And here we were, building our so-called empires. Yeah. And it was easy. Yeah. Because by this time we were all social friends. Yeah. You know, we knew each other, we knew the families, we knew the kids.
Yeah, they were good people.
Good people. Yeah, good people. Same synagogues.
Right. Yeah, too. I want to ask you about, I'm going to jump back and forth a little bit here, but I want to ask you the story that, I mean, everyone's so fascinated by, which is, we want to hear the story of the Twin Towers because it's fascinating. The timing is fascinating. What happened is fascinating. Walk us through that a little bit.
Years earlier, I saw a piece of land in New Jersey on the Garden State Parkway for sale.
Like you're driving by?
And it was, Bell Labs was close by with major installations. So I decided, I was in the car with Klara. I said, sweetheart, this is a good piece of land. This is a Bell Labs neighborhood.
Did you talk about real estate with your wife often?
Yeah.
Okay.
Suppose the reason for it is when we were first married, 1956. That summer, we acquired the contract for 220 East 23rd Street.
Your first building. So she's been there from the beginning.
From the beginning.
Incredible.
And she was good at math. And she was good at doing mathematical tables. There were no computers at the time.
It was all by hand. Right.
So I said, sweetheart, can you do this? Can you figure out this?
So she was kind of your CFO.
Yeah.
Essentially, yes.
Wow.
Well, you were busy buying light fixtures and
she's running the numbers. Wow. Okay, so you're in New Jersey. And
So
you see
we're
this
in
piece
New
of
Jersey.
Yeah.
Saw this piece of land. Decided we could build 300,000 feet of office space on this piece of land. But 300,000 feet, it's a lot of space. Small town in New Jersey. Yeah, Homedale, New Jersey. Bell Labs, huge operation. I said, so we put up a sign, build to suit, 100,000 feet. Nothing happens. I said, got to get some action here. Got an earth mover to start moving dirt around. Nothing, still nothing happens. Went to the brokers. They said, no, it's hard for people until they see something real.
Yeah.
They don't.
You got the earth movers just to show that there was something going on?
Just shuffling
It was
dirt.
just an ass.
You're not, there's no foundation being built, no nothing.
Just shoveling dirt. Wow.
That's great. That's a big shot story.
Yeah.
But end of story. I said to myself, and I said to Klara, I said, sweetheart, nothing's going to happen here until we start putting up a building. So she said, what are you going to do? I said, I think I'm going to go to the bank, get some money, put up some steel. So that's exactly what he did.
But when you say put up some steel, I mean, did you go to the architect, draw up the plans?
Yeah,
Okay, so this time
we
it's
drew
for
up some
real.
plans,
It's not just putting steel.
So now,
yeah.
so we put the foundation, put up steel. Call comes in. What are you building? I said, we're building 100,000 feet, 3 stories. They said, but it's a big parcel of land. How much can you build? I said, well, we can build 300,000 feet. We signed a 30-year net lease with Bell Labs for 300,000 feet.
Wow. And they could have just bought the land themselves and done it, right?
And they already had a space nearby.
Right, next door.
Wow.
Huh.
We then financed the finished buildings with the Bell Labs lease.
Which is tier 1.
We financed for several $1 million more than it cost to build the building and land. It was a home run.
That's amazing. All because you were driving on the New Jersey.
So you had some extra money at this point.
But it also showed me the potential, if you're a developer, what you could do, how you can create much more wealth.
As opposed to just buying an existing building to build yourself to be a developer, you can create far more wealth.
But a lot of risk. I mean, at this point, you're very well off.
Yeah.
Why do you need it? Why do you need that risk?
I wanted the challenge, the excitement of doing something like this. The fact that we could really do so much better.
Yeah.
It took us all these years to get to this point, but all of a sudden, one swift move and holy smokes.
Everything changed.
Look how our net worth increased.
Hey, Big Shot listeners. We wanted to tell you quickly about one of our favorite podcasts. It's called How to Take Over the World. It's hosted by our friend Ben Wilson. Here on Big Shot, we help some of the greatest entrepreneurs tell their stories. And what I love about Ben Wilson's show is he does the same thing for some of the greatest leaders ever throughout history. He uncovers their strategies, tactics, habits, innovations, and the sheer will that help propel them to the top. We really believe that the best way to be successful is to study those that have come before you, and that's exactly what How to Take Over the World does. So again, the show is called How to Take Over the World, and you can listen to it wherever you get your podcasts.
One day, Port Authority puts an ad in the paper, New York Times. 1 million square foot site for sale at the Trade Center.
Now, this is 7 World Trade, right? Not the Twin Towers?
7.
Right.
Apparently, they decided they didn't want to stay in the business of building buildings anymore. They built the Twin Towers, but the other buildings were up.
So, the Twin Towers was developed originally by the Port Authority?
By the port. They built everything.
And 7 is just down the street.
And 7 is the site on which they put a Con Ed substation in place, assuming that above it they would build a 1 million square foot office building.
And a Con Ed substation is for the subway?
It's for the Lower Manhattan.
Yeah.
All of Manhattan.
All
Okay.
electricity.
All the
Electricity for all of Manhattan.
Yeah.
Okay.
All of Lower Manhattan, including the Trade Center, obviously.
Right.
All Lower Manhattan. And so I got the material, got the information. An opportunity to build a 1 million square foot office building. 40-story building, 25,000 foot floors. What did I know about building a 40-story building?
Yeah, you just built something in New Jersey for the first time.
Yeah.
300,000.
300,000. Yeah. 3 floors. 3 stories.
Nevertheless, I looked at it, thought about it, and said to myself, can I do this? It excited the hell out of me. I remember coming home and talking to Klara. And I said, sweetheart, this is really a unique opportunity. A 1 million square foot building down Lowman in the Wall Street area. This thing should rent. So I said to myself, let's bid on it. I did. We bid on it. But this time I have an organization of people. We won the bid. We now have a site. First thing I did was to go down a couple of blocks from the Trade Center to J.P. Morgan. I have an old friend there, Jim Boise, who I've known for years. Good guy. Very senior position at Morgan, J.P. Morgan. I said, Jim, I got a 1 million square foot building. Can you use it? He said, what are the floor sizes? I said, 40-story building, 25,000 feet on the floor. He said, can you make the floors any bigger? He says, how large is the site? I said, the site is 50,000 feet. He said, well, can't you build a 50,000 foot floor? I said, no, because there's a substation there. I said, what do you need? He said, I could use a 2 million foot building.
This would be J.P. Morgan head office.
Yeah. I said, you could use a 2 million foot building, 40,000 floors. So I said, okay, let me see what I can do. I go out of J.P. Morgan, go back to by the border line. And I said, guys, we got to convert this 1 million foot building to a 2 million foot building. They said, come on, you're crazy. It can't be done. I said, why not? He said, because we have an operating Con Ed substation on the site with the pilings in place, the foundations in place to take a 40-story building, 25,000 floors. I said, but I got a 10 for a 2 million foot building with 50,000 foot floors. He said, there's no way to do this because you'd have to remove the existing foundations, replace them, and there's an operating substation down there. If the lights go out in Lower Manhattan,
No good. Okay.
forget it.
Oh, because Larry wants another 1 million square feet.
Well, J.P. Morgan
J.P.
does.
Morgan does, that's right, yeah.
So I started, and I listened, started analyzing the realities, and said to myself, J.P. Morgan, 2 million feet, it's twice as good because we're going to end up paying a ground rent to the Port Authority based on 2 million feet, which is twice the ground rent I would have paid them for 1 million feet. Not only it's good for them, it's good for me.
Yep.
I said to myself, and then I said to the port, I want to go up to Con Ed. I want to talk to the chairman. And I want you guys to come with me. You're crazy. I'll never do this. I said, maybe not, but let's give it a try.
And the chairman of Con Ed this is a public utility company.
Public utility.
And you don't have a deal with J.P. Morgan. I mean, you guys were just shooting the breeze, and he's like, yeah, we maybe could take 50,000 square foot floors. Right.
J.P. Morgan,
Yeah.
good name.
Good name.
And Larry,
Good
what's
brand.
at stake for you here? I mean, you're coming off this big score in New Jersey, and did you let it all ride? Like, are you all in on this project? Have you risked the firm on this, basically?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay, not yet.
Okay.
That was Klara's question.
It's a good one, no?
So, went to Con Edison, and I told him what I wanted to do. He said, Mr. Silverstein, Larry Silverstein. I said, yes. He said, aren't we suing you? I thought for a minute. I said, yes.
Actually, you are suing me on a different project.
He said, you're putting in a cogeneration plant And you're building at 11 West 42nd Street. Yes. I bought a building, a bankrupt building on 42nd Street.
And a coal generation plant helps you get energy for that building, right?
Yeah. I said, the reason for the cogeneration system is because it can provide electricity for all of my tenants, right? Number one. Number two, encouraged by the federal government of the United States. Number three, the cost of putting in the plant is $4 a square foot of space. The net savings resulting from generating your own electricity come to $1 a square foot. And if you can spend $4 a square foot to net out with $1 a square foot savings
Per year.
per year,
Right.
25% return.
Right, not bad.
Turns out, Treasury Department, we checked everything. 100% depreciable, 100% financeable.
Great deal.
Huge. So I explained this to Chuckles. He said, but you're invading my territory. He said, my job is to provide electricity for the city. He said, you're taking my responsibilities. I said, but just for my tenants, not for
the whole city, just for that one building.
Just for me,
Yeah.
nobody else.
Yeah.
He said, well, we think that's wrong. I said, my lawyers tell me we're absolutely in right. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it.
Sure.
So, end of deal. He said, listen, there's too much exposure, too much to try to do this. Because if you turn out the lights for Loman, if it doesn't work, he said, disaster. So I thought about it, and I said, okay, let me think about this a little bit. And I came back to him. We had a series of meetings from an absolute no to finally an agreement on his part to let me try it, but with complete supervision.
Yeah.
So that if anything went wrong, stop, and that's it, finished.
Wow, which is risky.
Yeah.
Huge risk.
Right. Because a lot can go wrong.
A lot go wrong.
But you did it, and JP Morgan moved in.
No,
JP Morgan didn't, yeah.
it didn't.
Who moved in?
We were able to remove the piles
Yep.
without affecting electricity. I mean, it was a series of engineering feats that
Why did he let you do this? So he has nothing to gain
I
from this.
tried, because of writing this book.
Yeah.
I went back to everybody. Everybody's dead. I can't remember how I convinced him to do this.
Right.
But somehow I convinced him. I don't know. I just can't
Because
remember.
he had no interest in this. He doesn't gain anything. In fact, he's got lots to lose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can't understand. I just don't remember. So when we're finishing the building,
Yep.
I
When you're finishing 7 World Trade.
should tell you a couple of other, on the way.
Yeah.
When we finally
Okay.
I went to Chase Bank.
Yep.
Len Casey was the mortgage officer at Chase. And I said, Len, I need to finance some World Trade. So I'm going to build a 2 million foot building. And I said, I'm going to need $300 million. So he agreed to give us $300 million.
Wow.
I had to sign personally that right? But so
Now you're all in.
now I'm all in.
And you don't have, once again, you don't have to do any of this. I mean,
Right.
you're set.
I'm all in, but I put a condition. The condition was that as I would build the building, as the floors went up, my guarantee went down. So that when I finished the building,
You'd have no personal guarantee
no
left.
personal guarantee
So as each floor went up, your personal liability went down.
went down.
Not leased, but built.
But built, that's right.
Built,
Yeah.
Right? So I had to build it. I had to know what I'm doing.
Yeah. So full liability if nothing happens.
Yeah.
Right.
And once
if
it's
nothing
done.
happens, right. Exposure, yes.
Wow.
But by that time, I felt I had a good team around me, knew what they were doing, capable of doing this without going over and being on time. Okay. Building's going up. Got a call. John Goodfriend, Salomon Brothers. They said, it looks like you're building an interesting building down here. 2 million feet. I said, 2 million feet. Oh, by the way, went back to J.P. Morgan, told them we could do the 2 million foot deal. It turns out Morgan got into a hassle with Ed Koch, the mayor. They got so upset with the mayor, they decided to pull the whole operation and move it down to Delaware.
Oh my God. So,
J.P. Morgan left New York.
yeah, so
No, just for that
that
operation.
particular
that-
operation.
wow.
Wow.
For the 2 million feet.
Just to
they-
give it to the mayor.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're all in, all because they told you they do 50,000 foot floors instead of 25,000 foot. Yeah.
And here we are,
Yeah.
$300 million
Sure, of course.
J.P. Morgan Chase. So,
Salomon
the
Brothers.
presentation of Salomon Brothers. They looked at it. They said, okay, interesting. We're going to come back to you. Sure enough, a week later, they called back. They said, we'll take 1 million feet.
Great.
Fantastic.
Because Salomon Brothers,
Great anchor.
fantastic name, right?
Yeah, of course.
This is going to be,
yeah.
gonna be a home run. Come home.
Sweetheart.
Tell Klara, I said, sweetheart, we got 1 million foot tent. She said, you know, I love you. She said, you're fantastic. Whatever you set your mind to doing, you do, and it's phenomenal. She said, God bless you. Okay,
Now you're feeling pretty good.
pretty good. Except that 6 months goes by. We're busy finishing the lease with Salomon Brothers. Big building, big lease. Takes a lot of time. I get a call from a good friend. He said, Larry, I have bad news for you. I said, what's the news? He said, we're not going to take your building. We're not going to take your space. I said, the building's half up.
Yeah.
He said, I know it. I said, you're going to end up owing me a lot of money. He said, I know it.
Because there's a breakup fee, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
End of the day, he said, we're moving to Mort Zuckerman, Boston Properties, is building on the Coliseum site.
Is in Columbus
57th
Circle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his building, designed by Elliott Tia, has got all kinds of bells and whistles. And it
Atriums and whatever.
It looks fantastic. I said, but your rent up there is going to be twice what your rent is with me. He said, Larry, we're making so much money, it doesn't make any difference. Now, when you talk to somebody and you hear that, you realize he's lost it.
Definitely.
He's really lost it. And there's no convincing a guy like that. In addition to which, he said, I sold ice cream on that corner when I was in high school. Came home. I said, Klara, we lost Sally 1 million feet. She looks at me and she said, you know what? Something else is going to come up and it'll be even better. I said, better than 1 million feet with Salomon Brothers? She said, I have faith in you. This is going to work out just fine. Don't worry. You're gonna make it. I said, I hope somebody's listening. So we go about our business, put the space up for lease again. Get a call one day from Drexelburn. They said, come make a presentation. Made a presentation. Call me back. They said, we like it. We'll take it. I said, how much? He said, 2 million feet.
The whole thing?
I said, 2 million feet? You take the whole building? He said, we'll take the whole building. We're going to sign a 30-year lease. It's ours. Finished, done. I came home. I said, Klara,
Sweetheart, you're right.
you're a genius.
Your prayers are answered, yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So how do we get to?
Because Mike Milken, who's the brains behind Drexelburn.
Yeah.
Ivan Boesky turned state's evidence against Mike Milken,
Okay.
the genius behind Drexel. He ended up in jail. The company ended up in bankruptcy. However, so I remember coming home to Klara and saying, now we lost Drexel. What do we do? The building is finished.
It's all Drexel.
And 100% empty. 100% empty. And the Chase Bank is saying, Larry, what are you going to do?
No.
call comes in from Mike Milk, from John Goodfriend, Salomon Brothers. He said, will you talk to me again? I said, I don't know. What do you want to talk about?
You've already made your, you've walked away from this deal.
He said, this deal is not going to happen. Jackie Onassis started litigation. So
yeah, we heard, Jackie Onassis is suing that building.
They obstructed the views.
We want to come back to 7 World Trade Center.
Now you know the price doesn't matter, too.
So this time we got 1,300,000 feet from him out of 2 million feet.
Perfect.
Made
great anchor tenant.
Huge
Salomon
success.
Brothers.
But you asked me how it all happened.
Yeah.
We're at the topping out ceremony for the original 7 World Trade Center. This is a 2 million foot building. Huge. Building. Yeah, right. I look up and I see the Twin Towers. And I said to myself, in 1987, I said, wouldn't it be incredible to someday own those?
Wow. That was something that was meaningful to you.
Yeah.
I mean, you were this, poor kid that built this real estate empire, and those were the Twin Towers.
And you didn't need any of this. I mean, you had made it long ago.
Of course not. But that was
challenge
something,
after challenge after challenge.
And that was something that was going to be meaningful to you, right? The Twin Towers.
So, in 1999,
99, yeah.
I get a call from Governor Pataki.
Okay. The governor of New York.
He said, would you be, and by the way, by this time, I had a terrific relationship with the Port Authority.
Okay.
Because the huge success.
Right, they got a lot of tax dollars.
2 million feet.
Yeah.
2 million feet of ground rent instead of 1 million feet.
Yeah.
They were very happy.
Yeah.
Very happy. And it's a good relationship. So I told the governor, I said, would I be interested? The answer is absolutely yes.
This is 12 years after you first looked at the Twin Towers and said, one day, I'd love to own those buildings.
Yeah. That was in 87.
87. 12 years later, 99.
This is 99.
Yeah.
So we started getting involved. And 5 days before the best and final bids were due. And I was one of the 3 finalists, 2 major public companies, both real estate investment trusts.
Yeah, REITs, yeah.
Yeah, REITs.
Who you can't call and bring into your deal this time.
I mean, they're million
exactly.
shareholders.
Yeah.
So net result of it, everybody said, Silverstein,
No way.
no way, you're a private company. You don't compete with these massive public companies.
Yeah.
Not gonna happen. Walking home from a dinner party on the 25th of January. Sent my driver home because he has a family, he's got kids. I said, I'm gonna walk home, I'm close to where I live, so go home. He went home. Wonderful dinner party. Our host gave us a bottle of wine in a special container with glasses and bottle, all sorts of stuff, really so. So I said to myself, do I leave it here and let him ship it to me? Or do I put on my heavy winter coat and put this in the crux of my arm and walk with it? I said, oh, put the crux of my arm and walk with it. So I leave the dinner party, walking up Madison Avenue, get to 57th Street and Madison, green light, cross the street with everybody else. And out of nowhere comes a car, slams into me, drunk driver, slams into me. I'm on the floor, broken pelvis in 11 places, and pain like I never had in my life. I thought I was gonna die. It was excruciating. I was just horrendous, right? Because this guy came at me.
Drunk driver.
Yeah,
Wow.
drunk driver. Ended up in the hospital. I said, please give me morphine, because the pain is horrible. So they gave me morphine, put me out. I wake up 2 days later, 3 days later, I forget, 2 or 3 days later in the hospital. And I said, what's today? It's the 28th day of January. I said, 28th day of January? The best and final is due in 2 days.
For the World Trade Center.
For the World Trade Center. I said, cut the morphine. Get me a conference room. I need phones. I need my people. I got
This is in the hospital. You're saying, cut the morphine. I need to be
And they said-
clear-headed.
And you're in your
They
70s
said
at
the
this
pain
point.
is going to be terrible. I said, I can't help it. I got
Yeah.
millions of dollars.
And you need a
invested.
conference room in the hospital, and your team needs to come in and cut the morphine. You want to be clear-headed for the negotiation of the World Trade Center.
With a broken pelvis.
With a broken pelvis.
Yeah.
So net result is they did that. The pain came back. It was horrible.
Sure.
Just horrible. But I couldn't help it. We had millions of dollars invested in this thing by this time.
They must have thought you were Michigan at the hospital.
I probably was.
Okay. We all are.
In any event, driving home a couple of days later, call comes in from J.P. Morgan, who was then representing the Port Authority in the sale of the Trade Center. And they said, Larry, you're the next high bid, but you didn't win. Steve Ross of Vornado. I said, what was his bid? 3.25 billion.
3.25 billion was the highest.
Mine was 3.2. And the low bid, Boston Properties and Brookfield, they put in 3.15 billion.
Okay.
So it's 50 million below me, 50 million above me.
Yeah.
50 million is a rounding error.
On a $3.2 billion building for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I lost. Okay. So I remember calling Steve Ross. I said, Steve, mazel tov.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Congratulations. I got some fantastic financing. I can't use it now.
You should use it.
You should take it. He said, Larry, that's very generous. I really appreciate that. I said,
Wow.
okay, fine.
You didn't have to do that.
No, but why not?
Yeah, you didn't win anyway.
I
It was a
mensch.
good deal.
Yeah.
it was the proper thing
It was
to
right
do.
to do.
Right.
A menschy thing to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to go on. Okay. Second of all, I've known Steve for 40 years. And he's a good competitor, tough competitor. 19 days go by. I get a call from J.P. Morgan. Are you still interested? I said, why? He said, because we're not going to close the deal with Vornado. He said, and if you're still interested,
You're the next bidder.
the next bidder. And I said, you know something? I don't want to be in a position of being a stalking horse. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to play that game. So I said, my next call, and I'm telling you this now, my next call is to Steve to make sure.
Make sure that he's actually out.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I called him. And he said, Larry, they don't trust me. I don't trust them. I'm a public company. The things they're asking me to do, I can't do. I said, what are they asking you to do? He told me what they're asking him to do.
You didn't think that was unreasonable.
No. Why? Because I'm a private
Yeah,
company.
you can.
Right,
Yeah,
I can do whatever I want.
yeah, that's right. You own the company. Right.
He couldn't.
Right.
And I've lived with them for 20 some odd years now at the original 7 World Trade Center.
Yeah. You knew how they operated.
So I called back and I said, okay, I'll take it. I said, but I want his contract. He's negotiated a contract, right? He's a good negotiator.
Yeah,
I said, you want me to close in
His
21
contract is
days?
the one I want for that.
I said, I want his, the only way we'll close is in 21 days.
Oh my gosh.
Give me his contract. We ended up with his contract. But I remember calling him. And I said, Steve, I want your contract. He said, Larry, it cost me a lot of money. I said, are you asking me to pay for your contract? He said, yes. I said, you know, I offered my financing
Your financing
to
to
you.
him.
I didn't ask you for a dime. And he said, you're a more generous guy than I am. That's exactly what he said.
You paid for his contract?
No.
You did. Good. So you close on the building August 2001.
Yeah.
Right.
September 11th happens.
6 weeks later.
6 weeks later, yeah.
You are not in the building because, from what we understand in our research,
My wife saved my
your
life.
wife told you to go to a dermatologist for a skin cancer check. And you have, now the story we understand, correct me if I'm wrong, you had missed a few appointments already. And sweetheart, you better go to this one. And so you went that morning.
I was prepared to go that morning. I canceled my appointment here with a tenant.
To go to the dermatologist. Right. You would have been in the building on September 11th.
Yeah. I wouldn't be here.
And you wouldn't be here. The only reason you're sitting here with us right now is because your
She
wife
made you finally
made you finally go to the doctor to
Yeah.
check your skin.
You know, at that time we were married 45 years. And when you're married to somebody for 45 years, the last thing you want to do is get her right.
I've been married for 10 years. He's a little bit further along than me. And we're also married to Jewish women too. So trust me.
And the words are yes, dear.
That's exactly right. Or sweetheart.
From you to her.
That's exactly right. So you weren't there. And actually your children, who also worked in the building, they usually come in at 9 a.m. and the towers are hit at 8:30.
8:45.
8:45. So they would have been, 15 minutes later, had a terrorist attack happen
Disaster.
then, they would have been gone. Yeah. So you were saved by the dermatologist. They were saved by 15 minutes.
By traffic.
By traffic. And then actually what I also find interesting is that Twin Towers come down and you decide, and I believe it was your wife who said, I know you're going to want to do this. And I know you're not going to sleep until you do it. And so you decided to rebuild.
Actually, it's close.
Yeah. Tell us.
But I remember saying to her, because she was there, she was there my entire life.
Sure.
Right? Part of my entire life. And whatever I've done, with her access, with her acquiescence and so forth, complete knowledge of what I was doing. And so I sat down with her one day and I said, we have to make a decision. And I need your help. Because at the end of the day, if you don't want me to do it, I won't do it. Because I said, I've promised you so many times that we'd go out, build another motor yacht, travel around the world and so forth. Because once we had the trade center, we had enough.
Yeah.
Finished, done. Everybody was provided for.
Yeah.
Right? So I said, we can, if you want now, go off, build another motor yacht, go around the world, do whatever you want. Anything you want, we could do, which is what I promised you to do. Alternative to that is rebuilding the trade center.
Rebuilding.
And I said, this is going to take at least 10 years of my life. So I can't do this without you. I need you by my side. And so she looks at me and she said, you're not going to be happy doing anything else for your life, so let's get on with rebuilding the trade center.
And you did.
Just like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I know.
It's such a meaningful thing for America. Well, Larry, what is chutzpah?
I mean, this conversation, this whole project is an exploration of Jewish entrepreneurship and Jewish pride, which frankly is probably needed now more than ever, I would say, at least in my lifetime. Yeah. But the question David's asking is, there's something about people like you and who we look up to as role models, and there's this element of chutzpah in your story, and we're fascinated where it comes from.
I mean, you started with nothing, and here we are. You bought the World Trade Center and then rebuilt it. It's an American iconic building. I mean, how did that happen? How did you have such chutzpah?
I can't tell you. I don't know. All I know is that 2 days after 9/11, Governor Pataki called me at 7 o'clock in the morning and said, what do you think we ought to do? I said, there's not a doubt in my mind. It needs to be rebuilt. And the reason it needs to be rebuilt is because the Trade Center was the locomotive for business activity in Lower Manhattan. Without it, forget it, Lower Manhattan wouldn't be what it is today. But it is the locomotive, has been for all these years. And the reason for it is you got you got 11 mass transit lines, plus the fast trains to New Jersey. It's all here. I said, you just have to rebuild these buildings because other buildings, millions of feet of other buildings down here, and people are living down here. So maybe they'll move out for a while. But if we put it back and put it back better than what existed initially, it'll come into its own again. So I said, I'll spend the next 10 years of my life. If my wife agrees, I'll spend the next 10 years of my life.
She did agree to it.
Yeah.
Is chutzpah uniquely, does it have to do with our Jewish upbringings?
Well, I don't know if any other religion has a word that applies as chutzpah does.
Yeah, it's like audacity. But it's interesting because, one of the reasons that this project is so meaningful to us is we're trying to explore what makes the Jewish condition so unique. One question that we ask all our guests is, when did you know that you made it?
There was a time when I said to Klara, my father had always exposed me to boats, small boats. And I remember his taking me to the boat shows every year. And I said, Dad, why are we doing this? We can't afford this. He said, because you need to know what's out there. So if you want to work for this, if you want to strive for this, you'll know that it's here. It's your call. And I'll never forget that. Because I remember one day when I was dating Klara. Typical date was 5 cents for the Staten Island ferry. Great ride, great views. And we were together. Cost nothing, 5 cents, fantastic. So we spent time on the water. We loved the water. And I remember saying, once we bought our first boat for $2,500, and we took our first child, Sharon, on the water. Then our second child, Roger, and Sharon. Then our third, Roger, Sharon, and Lisa on the water. The boats had to get bigger. Sure. So we kept growing. And I finally said to Klara one day, I said, sweetheart, a friend of ours had just bought a 37-foot Egg Harbor.
Beautiful boat.
I said, we get to that stage, we can own a boat like that. We don't want anything else. It's enough. Finished, done.
We have enough.
And then when you got there, were you able to turn to her and smile?
So we have a 180-foot boat.
Beautiful.
With a 14 crew.
And you love it?
Love it.
Every time you walk on it, it's meaningful.
Yeah.
Because you built that. You did that.
Yeah.
What do you tell your grandchildren? What do you tell your children about how to live a life? I mean, you seem not only ambitious, but you're deeply in love with your wife of, almost 70 years. You have this incredible relationship with your children, and you have this amazing business, and you have a certain, contentment. What's the secret?
Yes, but we're on the board at NYU. Then we're on the board of the medical center. Got to know the medical students. Understood what their concerns were. And I remember sitting with Klara and saying, you know what? These kids want to practice family medicine, and they can't. Because they have to pay for the cost of tuition, and they're going to end up borrowing $250,000. How are they going to pay that off with family if they can't? So I said, let's try something. So we paid for the first. We paid for 5 kids and covered their medical school education. Endowed it, and we did that for several years.
Sure.
So, that to me, I remember completing that, saying to Klara, and having dinner with Ken Langone and his wife, and he put $100 million into it. It was really terrific. That to me was more important than anything else we had done. Wow. Because there we had a direct impact.
Yeah. And you saw the impact of that.
Yeah.
It was visible, it was visceral, it was...
So every year they come upstairs. They come, put them into our conference room. We spend a couple of hours together.
These are all the medical students?
Yeah. And it's just, every year they come, we sit there, my wife and I, in tears, just listening to these people.
There's a lot of meaning.
How it's affected them.
It's incredible.
The things they're about to do, what they're about to accomplish. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Look, David and I have built our entire lives and careers standing on the shoulders of giants, and sometimes the giants don't even know it, like you. We didn't have, pictures of athletes or musicians or, actors on our as posters on our walls. We talked about stories like Larry Silverstein, and for us to come full circle and sit down with you here today is not only a great honor, but it is incredibly meaningful for us. And we hope to have half the impact you've had, Larry, on the world. And we're really grateful for this time.
Quite inspirational, Larry. To have started with nothing and gone as far as you have, and to have laid it all on the line time and time again when you didn't have to, is just so impressive. And the way you've given back to your community is admirable, and something that we should all strive for.
Started from the bottom, now